America's immigrant population is changing dramatically. You may see the changes if you look around in big city train stations, in shopping malls, or on college campuses. The change is due to a major shift in the source of new entrants to the country. More better educated immigrants from Asia are immigrating in such huge numbers, they are displacing people from Central and South America who have been the dominant incoming population for decades. This major change of new or would-be Americans is creating a social and economic transformation. This Asian influx is transforming U.S. culture and impacting the economy. Although no single country of origin dominates, the largest groups of people come from China, India, and the Philippines. Here come some numbers, so please listen closely. New immigrants are described as people between the ages of 25 and 65 who've been in the U.S. less than 5 years. 62% of recent Asian arrivals were college educated, compared with 40% from Africa and 23% from Latin America. And 86% of immigrants from India held college degrees or better.
Research shows that there's just no question that the more education you come with, the better you do. And that's still true today. The more educated do better than the least educated. There's no question.
But despite Asian immigrants' educational achievements, Camarota's latest research is showing that higher education levels have not improved the standard of living for recent Asian arrivals.
Immigrants are starting out today as far behind as they did in the past. What's surprising is if we look at poverty or welfare use or labor force participation, that is the share with a job or at least looking for one, all these typical measures of economic well-being, the new immigrants today aren't doing any better than the ones 2 decades ago.
What impact on the economy and on society?
The poverty rate of new immigrants, people who'd come in the last 5 years, back in 2000 was 21%, about double the rate for natives. We're just looking at adults here. If we look at new arrivals today, say from the 2017 data, it's about 21%, the poverty rate.
Camarota's research also shows a rise in the percentage of immigrants who rely on Medicaid, from 6% in 2007 to 17% in 2017. And it shows the percentage of immigrants on food stamps has tripled in the last decade.
About 1/3 of all the children in poverty in America come from an immigrant family. So that's created enormous challenges, not just for schools, but for social services in general.
The Washington Post reports the Trump administration may make it harder for immigrants who use any form of public assistance to become U.S. citizens. The government is already penalizing immigrants who go on welfare, considering them a, quote, public charge. This factor may be used against them when they apply for citizenship. The Trump administration was to broaden the category of benefits that immigrants will be penalized for using to include earned income tax credits and federal health insurance subsidies. The proposal was designed to save taxpayers money, but some say it will also deter new entrants to the U.S.
There's been a huge demographic shift from less educated Hispanic people coming into the country and now more educated Asians, and yet they too are having trouble finding work. Why is that?
It looks like what's happening is the economy is just not absorbing immigrants as easily or as well as it did in the past. And maybe now we're getting people who are a little bit more from less academically rigorous institutions. So you might have been getting elite, say, Chinese and Indian students in the past, but today we're getting students who are much more from the more mediocre universities.
According to the Migration Policy Institute, if educated immigrants aren't using their training and improving their economic standing, this harms the economy. Progressives say immigrants forced into lower-skilled jobs miss out on nearly $40 billion in earnings and that translates to about $10 billion in lost tax revenue.
A fair immigration plan, less immigration.
But those opposed to mass immigration counter, savings for the taxpayer are greater if the U.S. cuts back on the flow of people in poverty into this country. The Federation for American Immigration Reform lobbies for lower immigration targeted to fill gaps in the U.S. economy. President Dan Stein says admitting more highly educated immigrants should help the economy in principle, but right now, the market for those skills is saturated.
We do still have legal immigrants coming because of family preference who are less skilled. But we also have more highly skilled immigrants, highly educated immigrants coming into the U.S. economy. It's good to have highly skilled immigrants or highly educated immigrants versus unskilled because they will expand the productive potential of the economy. However, you can get too much of a good thing. And the problem is, in the aggregate, the size of the immigration flow is mismatched to the economic needs of the country. We need to reduce the flow, move to a merit system, and try to assure that the immigrants coming more narrowly fit the labor market needs of the country.
Dr. Ahmad Javad Momand is having a hard time finding work as a doctor. After helping the U.S. government in Afghanistan, he and his family were given special visas to live in the U.S. He specialized in anesthesiology in Afghanistan, but the U.S. does not recognize his degree or his years of experience. Dr. Momand is currently unemployed, and his standard of living has been lowered.
In Afghanistan, I did have a bigger house, and at some point in my life, I had a very good job advising ministers and deputy ministers, and then my family and I thought if we go to the United States, then of course things will get much better.
Ahmad Javad spends 35 hours each week searching for employment for entry-level jobs, and he's still not finding work.
The entry-level position for a doctor like me, for a specialized anesthesiologist here, would be the anesthesia technician position, where you would just clean the instruments and do some inventory and assist the nurses to move the patients and prepare the equipment.
Ahmad is seeking help to find employment through relatives, a network of other doctors, and from a progressive national nonprofit organization called Upwardly Global.
We teach them both how to search for a U.S. job, we acculturate them, we give them practice to do it, and most importantly, we help reconnect them with a professional network that can support them in their job search.
Cicerani says many new Asian immigrants, like Dr. Javad, face unexpected barriers when searching for employment in the U.S. That's part of the reason why many are forced to take lower-wage jobs and rely on government programs for food and health care.
Both not knowing enough of the culture and the nuance, as well as the actual communication skills necessary to effectively job search, both are a barrier. Think about some of the oddities of what we expect in American culture that might be different from another. Looking enthusiastic about the job, leaning in, smiling, acting excited, having questions prepared. All of these may not be the norm in another culture.
Upwardly Global reports its training program has helped more than 5,000 skilled immigrants and refugees find work in the U.S. Even with extra training and support, Upwardly Global has placed just more than half of the people it trained into professional jobs, and that as far out as 15 months after they completed the program. But many immigrants find what are called survival jobs, driving cabs, working as janitors, and they become more like permanent employment. As well as economic issues, there are social justice issues raised by this new influx of Asian immigrants.
It always takes courage to speak up against injustice.
Immigrants and U.S. citizens of Asian descent are starting to speak up about what they perceive as discrimination, especially against their children when applying to the country's elite schools and universities. 12 years ago, Jian Li thought he was being discriminated against when he applied to Princeton.
Toward the end of my junior year of high school, Princeton University published a press release highlighting some research Princeton sociologists had done on college admissions. According to this research, which was based on a quantitative analysis of confidential admissions data, Asian Americans had to score up to hundreds of SAT points higher than other students in order to have the same chance of being admitted.
He was the first Asian student to file a complaint at the Justice Department's Office of Civil Rights. It took 10 years for an answer.
The OCR wrote, Princeton concedes that it does consider the race and national origin of applicants for admission, but that these are only two of the many factors that the university may consider.
I was ranked second among my class of 1,002 students.
6 years after Jian Li filed that complaint, Michael Wang, a child of Chinese immigrants, applied to 10 of America's best universities and colleges. With a 4.76 grade average, a near-perfect SAT score, and a perfect ACT score, he was certain he'd be accepted to multiple Ivy League schools. He wasn't. He was either turned down or waitlisted.
In my head, at least, I thought among the top 4 that I would get into one of them. I was definitely disappointed, not to say the least. It definitely wasn't the results I was expecting.
When he learned his Latino and African American friends were accepted to some of the schools where he was denied entry, he started to question why.
So in my head, I was questioning as to, what do they have that I don't have, or what did they do that I didn't do that allowed them to get into these schools?
His conclusion? As an Asian American, he was being held to a higher standard than other minority students. He reached out to admissions offices to question their policies, then filed complaints with Yale, Stanford, and Princeton.
I wouldn't say that there's blatant racism. I can't exactly point that out 100%, but I'm willing to say that, there is some bias in how they judge students, and that Asian Americans are judged on a higher standard compared to other students, which is not fair.
His complaints were ignored. He dropped them and was eventually admitted to Williams College, where he says he received an exceptional education.
This is going to be a zero-sum game regardless. For someone to win, someone else has to lose. And my only issue is that, I'm fine with, I'm fine if, we're not the ones winning, if Asian Americans aren't the one who benefit from the affirmative action. But at the very least, I don't think Asian Americans should be hurting from affirmative action.
But Jian and Michael and many other Asians believe that Ivy League schools do hold Asian American students to a higher standard. Since Michael's complaint, many other Asian American students have filed complaints questioning how affirmative action is applied.
I have a message to every single Asian American student in the country who is applying to college. Your civil rights are being violated, and you must speak up in defense of them.
In 2015, the Asian American Coalition for Education, a nonprofit coalition of more than 60 Asian American organizations, filed a complaint with the Departments of Education and Justice. They asked for a civil rights investigation against Harvard, Brown, Dartmouth, and Yale University for their allegedly discriminatory admissions practices against Asian American children.
Racial code has been banned by the U.S. Supreme Court since 1978, and also it's not right. It's against the Constitution, U.S. Constitution 14th Amendment. It's against the Civil Rights Act, Title VI, and also, very importantly, it's against the spirit American Dream. American Dream says every U.S. citizen have equal opportunity to achieve success and prosperity through hard work, determination, and initiative, regardless of their racial background.
The AACE's complaint triggered an investigation into Harvard's admissions practices by the Departments of Education and Justice.
African Americans make up, I think, 13% of the country. Latinos, Hispanics, about 17%. And they just want representation of their minority as the percentage it is of the U.S. population. So why not just 6% of Asian Americans if that's the percentage of the population?
We are not engaged in any zero-sum game with any other racial group. What we want is equal treatment. And also, we support economic-based affirmative action, which is a person grew up in poor communities, in poor families, should get a favorable treatment.
There is no proof that the investigations have changed Harvard's admissions policies. That said, the percentage of Asian American students admitted to Harvard has risen during the last decade from 17% to an estimated 22% in 2017. And the pressure on Ivy League schools is getting more intense. Students for Fair Admissions, a membership organization, filed a lawsuit in Boston federal court against Harvard. The lawsuit states Harvard's admissions policies have disadvantaged highly qualified Asian American students and extends preferential treatment to other minorities. An October trial date has been set. Students for Fair Admissions also filed a lawsuit against the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill.
Students for Fair Admissions believes that the use of race and ethnicity is unfair and unconstitutional. What we believe colleges and universities should implement, and implement aggressively, is outreach and really a helping hand to those students who are applying who have come from disadvantaged socioeconomic backgrounds.
Harvard's response to the lawsuit states, quote, "The college's admissions policies are fully compliant with the law and are essential to the pedagogical objectives that underlie its educational mission. In fact, within its holistic admissions process and as part of its effort to build a diverse class, Harvard College has demonstrated a strong record of recruiting and admitting Asian American students." It goes on. "We will vigorously defend the right of Harvard and other universities to continue to seek the educational benefits that come from a class that is diverse on multiple dimensions." End quote. Proving discrimination is tough. Students for Fair Admissions helped fight Fisher v. the University of Texas at Austin and lost in the Supreme Court. The court stated racial preferences used by the University of Texas were constitutional under the federal Equal Protection Clause, but Blum is continuing to fight.
In 1992, 15% of Harvard's incoming freshman class was Asian. In 2013, the year before we filed our lawsuit, about 16% of Harvard's incoming freshman class were Asians. So during this lengthy period of time, year after year, Harvard seemed to admit about the same percentage of Asians year after year. However, during the same period of time, the number of Asians applying to Harvard better than doubled. Now, how is it that this could not be a quota?
However, Asian Americans Advancing Justice, a nonprofit lobbying for civil rights, says it sees no definitive proof that schools are discriminating against Asians and has filed amicus briefs in support of Harvard's position.
I have not seen any evidence of Asian Americans being discriminated against at Ivy League schools or elite schools. And let me be clear, is if Asian Americans were being discriminated against, certainly my organization and a number of organizations will be suing and taking legal action against quotas or against that sort of overt racial discrimination. Affirmative action certainly benefits everyone, including Asian Americans, by making sure we have a diverse campus. Because again, our workforce in the United States is changing. The demographics of this country is changing. And it's important to have these college students have an experience that reflects that diversity in America. And affirmative action helps to accomplish that.
Yang says his organization believes Asians should not be focusing on this narrow point, but on other admissions issues.
If Asian Americans, especially this particular group that you're talking about, is concerned about Asian Americans getting to college, then they really should be focusing on a broader set of issues, such as legacy admissions, such as admissions to wealthy donors to the college, such as athletic scholarships. Perhaps all of those do have a place in college admissions, but those admissions make up a far larger percentage of admissions than this narrow category that they're focused on related to affirmative action.
Top-ranked universities have claimed they do not discriminate based on race and define the admissions process as holistic, which takes into account many factors other than test scores and grades. But with more educated Asians applying to Ivy League schools and admission rates plummeting overall, it will be far more difficult for applicants of any race to gain acceptance. For example, Colombia accepted 12% of applicants in 2007, but the class of 2020 includes a mere 6% of the students who applied. Cornell accepted almost 31% of applicants in 2007. In 2020, only 14% of applicants will be admitted. Stanford is the most selective, accepting only 5.1% of applicants, which means Stanford turned down 19 of every 20 students seeking admission. Despite the recent rise in education levels of immigrants, Americans disagree about how many people should be admitted and with which qualifications.
The flow of people now into the United States looks to be back to the record it was maybe in 1999, when again the Census Bureau data suggests about 1.8 million people settled in the United States.
So aside from the population growth, which is a tremendous problem, it's the type of growth that you have. These are mostly low-skilled workers that are not contributory to the system and actually are a drain on the system in many respects. And what Tom Cotton and I are doing is calling this out as a crisis.
To decrease and regulate the number of immigrants, Senators Perdue and Cotton, with the support of the President, want to change to a merit-based immigration system like those used in Canada and Australia.
The RAISE Act, R-A-I-S-E.
Senators Perdue and Cotton have sponsored the Reforming American Immigration for a Strong Economy, or RAISE Act, that would prioritize highly skilled immigrants and limit family unification, or what is called chain migration.
Today, in the current system, we bring in a little over 1 million people. Of that, 140,000 are designated as workers, and so they are looked at as their worker, as their skills to some degree, their ability to work. The practical nature of that is only 70,000 come in based on their skills to work. The other 70,000 of the 140 are pretty much immediate family. So what that means is that we're letting historical immigrants determine who future immigrants are going to be under this system, 950,000 people a year. And I would argue that that's just not contributory to an economy in the situation we're in today. And so this is a system that absolutely is screaming to be reformed. That's what we're proposing here.
Future immigration will change the face of America by 2065. Among the projected 441 million Americans in 2065, 78 million will be immigrants, and 81 million will be people born in the U.S. to immigrant parents. Asians are projected to become the largest immigrant group in the country, surpassing Hispanics by the year 2055. Despite congressional inaction so far on the RAISE Act, research shows that immigration is evolving on its own. The projected changes in population makeup will have huge economic and political implications. For example, there are now 18 Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in Congress. As Asians continue to spread across the country with fast growth in communities in Nevada, Arizona, North Carolina, North Dakota, and Georgia, and as they start to vote in greater numbers, their power could change political outcomes.
Immigration is fundamentally remaking the political landscape in the United States. I've projected that over the next 20 years, legal immigration, because this is really only legal immigration, will add about 15 million potentially new voters.
These are projections by experts, but experts aren't always right. Dan Stein says the immigration flow adjusts to the reality of the U.S. job market.
We have vast empirical evidence that the immigration flow does respond to changes in our labor market needs. After the Great Recession in 2007, we saw a big drop in illegal immigration from Mexico. Still hasn't resumed at the same level, and part of the reason is the U.S. labor market need for unskilled labor is actually finite. In a high growth, post-industrial, superpower, information society, the need for unskilled labor is not unlimited. There are great connections, networks between immigrant groups talking to relatives back home. If the labor market is saturated, if there are no economic opportunities, people make the rational decision not to come.